The most dangerous document in your office right now isn't a lawsuit and it isn't a resignation letter. It's that fixed price contract that you have just signed. I recently had a CFO, let's call him David, call me at 9 p.m. on a Friday evening. And he sounded like as if he won the Super Bowl. And he said, Noel, I beat them. I capped the budget at $10 million. The price is locked. The risk is all on them. And I had to stop him right there. And I said, David, please put the champagne away. You haven't signed a safety net. You've just signed a declaration of war. And he laughed. He thought I was being cynical. 3 months later, nobody was laughing. I walked into his boardroom and it didn't look like a project meeting. It looked like a crime scene. And David's team was begging for a critical compliance report for the auditors. But the vendor wasn't even looking at the code, they were staring at the scope document. The project manager didn't say, sure, let's fix that. He pulled out a form and said the three words that kills every enterprise project. That's a change order. Now, in that moment, David finally understood the dirty little secret that I've learned over 24 years managing 700 million in complex aviation and defense deals. Risk is never transferred, it is only hidden. So, when a vendor signs a fixed price deal, their goal is no longer to deliver value. Their goal is to protect their margin. Every hour they spend working is an hour of profit they lose. So the moment you sign that paper, you're not partners, you are on opposite teams. You want the best system, they want the quickest exit. So is the fixed price dead? No. But you have to stop signing black box deals where you guess the scope and hope for the best. So, in this video, I'm going to show you the three specific traps that turn David's project into a battlefield. We're going to be talking about decoupling design from build so you stop paying for their guessing game. The second part is the menu card strategy so you stop fighting over every single report. And the third is the key personnel handcuff. So they can't swap out the A team for the B team. So if you are a CIO or a program director, you don't need a lecture on contract law. You need to know why your project is bleeding money and exactly how to apply the tourniquet. So let's get to work. So let's go back to David. He walked into that project thinking that he had bought a partner. But 2 weeks in, the honeymoon was over. He realized that by signing a fixed price deal, he hadn't started a partnership. He had entered into a zero sum game. Now, think about the math from a vendor's perspective. David wants the best system possible. He wants the audit reports, the executive dashboards, he wants 100% user adoption. The vendor, they want the absolute bare minimum required to get the acceptance certificate signed so that they can leave. Now, these two goals aren't just different, they are enemies. In a time and materials contract, if David asks for a new feature, the vendor is happy. They say, sure, let's build it. Why? Because they get paid to build it. Alignment is easy. But in David's fixed price contract, when he asked for that extra compliance report, the vendor didn't hear, let's improve the system. They heard, I want you to lose money. So every extra hour they spend on David's good idea is a dollar taken straight out of their net profit. So they pulled out the only weapon that they had to protect that margin, the change order machine. And here is the reality that hit David like a truck. They are much better at firing that weapon than he is at dodging it. While David is focused on his business, they have a team of contract managers whose only job is to scan David's scope document, find the vague words, and turn them into a billable change order. So, how did David get into that mess? Well, he fell for trap number one, the best practice lie. In the sales pitch, the vendor told David, we will stick to the SAP best practices. We don't customize. We want you to stay out of the box. To David, that sounded great. It sounded disciplined. And most importantly, it sounded cheap. So he signed it. But here is actually what happened in the workshop. So David's team explained their business to the project team. So they walked the consultant through a very specific rebate program they ran for their top distributors. Now, this isn't just a process, it's their competitive advantage. It's the engine that drives the 40% of their revenue. Now, the consultant looked at them and said, you know, that's not standard SAP. You need to change your process to fit the software. Listen to me very carefully. Sometimes the consultant is right, but 50% of the time they are lying. They aren't saying no because it's bad for David's business. They're saying no because building that complex rebate logic is hard. It burns their best developers and it ruins their profit margin. So David agreed to go standard. He wanted to be a good client. Fast forward 6 months to user acceptance testing or the UAP. His VP of sales storms into his office. He can't calculate his distributor rebates. Now, the system is functionally useless to him, and the business is grinding to a halt. So David runs back to the vendor in a panic, and the project manager, well, he doesn't panic. He is chilled. He smiles and he says, "Oh, you really need that custom logic? We can build it. But since you signed off on the last design, here's a change request for $50,000. You can sign here." David just paid a $50,000 stupidity tax. Now, what is the fix? Well, you have to separate your business into two buckets. Bucket one is the commodities, which is your general ledger, your payroll, your fixed assets. Keep these as 100% standard. Nobody wins a customer because their general ledger is unique. Do what the software says. But bucket two is the differentiators. The stuff that actually makes you money, your rebates, your pricing logic, your customer experience. Fight for customization there. Don't let a vendor bully you into being standard on the very thing that makes your business special. Now let's look at trap two, the bait and the switch game. I call this the resource shell game. Now let's go back to David's sales meeting. He was sitting across from the vendor's lead solution architect. Let's call him John. And John was brilliant. He was a killer. He had done 15 implementations in David's specific industry, which was manufacturing. And he answered every single technical question without blinking. Now, David signed the deal because he felt safe. He thought, you know what? Okay, if John is running my project, we're good. But wait, look closely at the contract David just signed. Does it actually say John Smith, or does it just say a generic billing title like Senior Consultant Level 5? Because the week after the ink dried, John was gone. John is a closer. His job isn't to deliver the project, his job is to land the deal. Once the commission is booked, he is off to the next client. So, who walked into David's office on day one? It wasn't John, it was a guy named Steve. Now, Steve is a nice guy. He technically has 10 years of work experience, but he has been working on the new S4HANA cloud version maybe for the last 6 months. Now, he is learning on David's dime. Now, how did David spot this? There is one dead giveaway. And it's the single most annoying phrase in corporate America, the offline tactic. So David was in a workshop. He asked a very tough, specific question about API integration. Now, a real expert like John would say, no, that won't work. And here is exactly why. But Steve froze. He smiled nervously and said, that's a great question. Let's take that offline and I'll get back to you. Now, if you hear that once, it's fine. But if you hear that, let me take that offline 5 times in a meeting, you are in trouble. It means that the person in the room doesn't know the answer. They're just writing down your question, emailing the real expert back at the offshore center, waiting for the reply, and reading it back to you tomorrow. Now, David realized with horror, I'm paying premium on site rates for a glorified messenger service. And why does the system integrator do this? It's simple economics. In a fixed price model, their biggest cost is people. If they swap out the most expensive expert, which is John at $300 an hour, for a cheaper resource, which is Steve at $100 per hour, without lowering their price, their margin triples. Now, it isn't personal, it's just math. Finally, we have to talk about trap number three, the assumption minefield. Now, this is where the lawyers really gutted David. When David signed that statement of work or the SOW, he read the price section 5 times. He argued over every single dollar, but he skimmed the section buried in the back called the assumptions. And he thought, yeah, standard legal stuff, just boilerplate. Big mistake. That section wasn't boilerplate, it was the trap door. There were two specific lines in there designed to destroy David's budget. Trap A is the data trap. Now, the contract said the client will provide clean, perfect data in the SAP template format by week 4. Now, let's think about David's business. He had customer records from 1998 on a legacy mainframe. He had vendors with 3 different addresses, and he had parts with no descriptions, and his data was a garbage pit. And the vendor knew it. They knew it was physically impossible to clean 20 years of history in 4 weeks. But they put that date in the contract anyway. Why? Because at 9 a.m. on the Monday of week 5, the project manager walked into David's office and said, David, the data isn't ready. Okay, I have to issue you a delay notice. And here is the kicker. They kept the meter running. They charged David a burn rate. That means David was paying for 10 consultants to sit in their conference room drinking his coffee and scrolling through LinkedIn simply because, we cannot work until you give us the data. So David wasn't just paying for the delay, he was paying a ransom to get his own project moving again. Now, trap B, the speed trap. So the contract says the client must approve all the documents within 3 business days. 3 days? Now, David's steering committee only meets once in a month. His VP of supply chain was on PTO in Aspen. So naturally, David took 10 days to sign off on a complex blueprint document. And he thought, no big deal. We're partners. It's just a week. Partners. Now, they didn't say a word, they just logged it. So they had a shadow spreadsheet that David never saw, and in that spreadsheet, it had blueprint sign off 7 days late, UAT sign off 4 days late, integration specifications 5 days late. So they kept this list secret for 6 months. And at the very end of the project, just weeks before go live, the project manager slid a piece of paper across the table to David. He said, here is a cumulative delay of 40 days. That will be $200,000. Please pay prior to go live. So David was furious. He felt cheated, but the contract was clear. He realized it too late. This wasn't a project management issue, it was a revenue strategy. So, how do we save David? How can we apply that tourniquet? So, David's mistake was trying to swallow the elephant in one bite. He needs actually strategy one. So, strategy one is decouple the design from the build. You have to stop signing massive design build contracts. They're too big to succeed, and they're mathematically designed to fail. So, think about the psychology of the vendor. If David asks them for a fixed price before they have even seen the detailed requirements, what do? They panic. They look at his messy data, they look at his complex business structure and the logic, and they take their best guess. Then they slap a 30% or 40% risk premium on the top. So David thinks he is buying certainty, but he's actually paying extra for them to guess. So the solution is do a separate project first. Call it phase 0 or call it discovery. Hire a firm or a strong independent solution architect to come in just to do the design. And here's the controversial part. Pay them on a time and material basis. Now, I know what you're thinking, Noel, are you crazy? You just told me fixed price is safer. Why would I pay hourly? Because for the design, you want them to be slow. In a fixed price design, the consultant is incentivized to rush. They want to finish the document and get the sign off and go home. In a time and material design, you're paying them to turn over every single rock. You're paying them to interview every manager. You're paying them to find the skeletons in the closet before you start pouring concrete. Now, the output of this phase is something we call as a RICEF-W inventory. Well, it's just fancy consultant speak for a shopping list. And what does it talk about? Exact number of reports, exact number of interfaces, exact number of complex workflows. Now, this converts the vague ideas into line items. Now, here is the magic part. Once David has that list, he holds all the cards. He takes that list back to the market. He hands it to three different vendors and says, I don't need you to guess anymore. I need you to bid exactly on this list. Immediately, the price drops. The risk premium disappears. And those arguments about change orders, they vanish because the scope isn't a gray area anymore. It is black and white. Now for strategy number two, and this is my absolute favorite. This single clause would have saved David nearly $200,000 on his project. It's called the menu card, or in contract terms, unit pricing. So here is the mistake David made. He lumped his entire development budget into one giant pot of money. He said, here is $1 million for development. Don't do that. To a vendor, a lump sum isn't a budget, it's a target. It becomes like a slush fund that vanishes into thin air. You need to break it down and you need to agree on a price for the components, not just the whole thing. In your contract, right next to the payment terms, you insert a complexity matrix. And it looks something like this. Tier 1, simple definition, any object that takes 3 to 5 days to build, like a basic list report, the price is locked at $2,000. Tier 2, medium, definition, any object that takes 8 to 12 days, like a standard interface, price locked at $8,000. And tier 3 is complex. The definition, any object that takes 20 plus days, like a heavy custom workflow, the price is locked at $15,000. Why do you do this? Because 3 months from now, David is going to realize he missed a report. Scope creep happens on every project. In the old way, without the menu, David goes to the vendor and says, hey, I need this extra report. The project manager looks at him, he gives him the car mechanic look and he shakes his head and exhales slowly and says, oh, David, that looks really hard and that involves a lot of tables. That's going to cost you around $10,000. Now, David has no baseline. He has no argument. He has to pay. But with the menu card, that conversation changes completely. David looks at the specs for the new report. He audits the logic and he sees it's pulling data from two tables. So he calculates it's about, 4 days of work. He walks into the meeting and the vendor starts it's really hard act and David stops him. He pulls out the contract. He looks at tier 1 and he says, stop. Let's look at the data. This is a 4-day job. This fits the definition of simple. The contract price is $2,000. Start coding. No arguments, no negotiations, just execution. You've turned a 2-week commercial fight into a 2-minute administrative decision. Finally, we need to fix the trap that really gutted David. Remember trap number 2, the bait and switch? Now, David signed the deal because of John the expert, but he ended up with working with Steve, the rookie. Now, let's be realistic. David can't force John to stay forever. And if John quits the firm or wins the lottery, he is gone. And that is life. But David can stop the vendor from moving John voluntarily just to increase their profit margin. So David needs strategy number 3, the key personnel handcuff. Now, in his next contract, David demands a specific exhibit called key personnel. Now, he lists the role, lead solution architect named John Smith. And then he adds 2 clauses that turn that list from a suggestion into a law. Clause 1, veto power, right of refusal. So you write, if John Smith leaves the project for any reason, the client reserves the right to interview and reject his replacement. Now, this is huge. This stops them from dumping Steve, the rookie, on you. If the new guy isn't as good as John, David says no. And he keeps saying no until they send him another superstar. Clause 2, the poison pill. This is where the real leverage lives. So you write, if the key personnel are replaced, the vendor must provide a 4-week overlap period where both the old and the new consultant work together for knowledge transfer. And the vendor pays for both of them. Now think about the math. If the vendor voluntarily moves John, they now have to pay John's salary and the new guy's salary for a month, while only billing David for one. So they're losing money every single hour. And that is how you handcuff a vendor. You don't just find them, you make replacing your expert a logistical and financial nightmare. So they do the smart thing. They just leave John alone. So here is the bottom line. Don't bring a checkbook to a knife fight. Fixed price projects fail because leaders treat them like fire and forget missiles. They think, I signed the contract, the risk is transferred, I'm safe. You are not safe, my friend. A contract is just a stack of paper. It is not a project manager. It cannot think, it cannot negotiate, and certainly cannot fight for you. If you rely on a piece of paper to save your project, you have already lost. You have to know the game better than they do. Because the one thing you can never ever do is to outsource your own competence. Now, here is my offer to you. If you're sitting there, right now with a 50-page statement of work on your desk, and you have that heavy feeling in the pit of your stomach, listen to that feeling. I've put a link in the description below. Book a strategy call with me. Let's spend 60 minutes auditing your assumptions column together. Let's catch the traps before you sign your budget away. And make sure you hit subscribe because in the next video, we're going to talk about the number one thing your end users hate about modern ERPs. You know exactly what I'm talking about, the click fatigue. Why does it take 15 clicks in the new cloud app to do something that used to take 2 clicks in the old system? We're going to solve that mystery next week. Hi, I'm Noel Benjamin Decousta. Stop guessing, start leading, and I'll see you in the next one.